This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Canna Health.
What if you had such a clear understanding of your own DNA and genetic makeup that you could make informed decisions about what type of cannabis products interact best with your system? Well, now you can with EndoDNA. EndoDNA is a simple DNA test that maps your entire endocannabinoid system and then matches that summary with the specific cannabinoid ratio and terpene profile that aligns with your unique genotype. Imagine being armed with personal information when visiting a dispensary. You'll have the power and capability to purchase products that best align to your genotype. Visit their website to purchase the EndoDNA collection kit and Endo Decoded report at endodna.com/product and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. Again, that's endodna.com/product and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. The future of cannabinoid therapeutics is here with EndoDNA. Hello, my fellow people of the plan. In this episode of Cannabinoid Connect, I'm talking with Dustin Robinson. He's the founding partner of Mr. Cannabis Law, which is a full-service law firm focused on the cannabis and psychedelic industries. Dustin is also the co-founder of Mr. Psychedelic Law, a nonprofit focused on psychedelic legal reform. During his professional career, Dustin has drafted resolutions for psychedelic decriminalization for various cities in Florida and hopes to build a responsible legal framework in Florida for the commercialization of psilocybin mushrooms and other entheogens. During our conversation, we talk about Dustin's background regarding his experience with Mr. Cannabis Law, Mr. Psychedelic Law, and Eater Investments. We discuss the legalities surrounding cannabis, psilocybin, ketamine, and more. We talk about the 2018 Farm Bill. We discuss the burgeoning psychedelic industry and how technology innovations are contributing to the psychedelic boom, and much more. So I hope you enjoy this episode as you watch or listen to my conversation with Dustin Robinson, who is the founding partner of Mr. Cannabis Law and the co-founder of Mr. Psychedelic Law. Dustin Robinson, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. Excited to be on your podcast.
Yeah, excited for you to be on as well. It's Dustin Robinson, also aka Mr. Cannabis Law. And tell me, man, how did you come up with that name? I'm thinking, were you on Twitter or on one of the social medias and you just kind of early on checked to see if those were available and boom, you snatched them up? Or what's the origin story?
Yeah, I mean, when I got involved in the industry, really I got involved because I ran into some friends after I had sold my last business that were in the cannabis industry, and I helped them put together a transaction. At the time, I didn't really know much of anything about cannabis laws, but they were doing a cannabis deal, it was an M&A deal. And
what year was this?
This was around, I think it was probably 2017.
Okay.
And yeah, I didn't know much about it, but they needed some legal assistance. I told them I'd be happy to jump into it. I had actually been planning to take a year off after I sold my last business, so I thought it was an interesting project, and ended up diving into it and found that it was more complex than I expected. I was very comfortable with the substantive area of M&A law, but this particular transaction involved two different states. So I actually went back to I went to talk to some of the partners at the law firm I started at, which was Holland and Knight, which is a big law firm, to see what kind of stuff they were doing in the cannabis space. And I was surprised to hear that they weren't doing anything in the cannabis space because it was federally illegal. So I found that there was a void in the market for highly sophisticated commercial transactional expertise within the cannabis industry, because a lot of the big firms at the time just weren't getting involved, and now more have gotten involved, but still many of them still won't because it's federally legal. So I really set up my firm to provide affordable legal services for the cannabis space. And being that it's cannabis, I thought it was important that it was kind of playful and not so serious. This is a product that, although there's certainly medical uses, I think really the path that we're going right now is for recreational adult use. So I wanted my brand from my law firm to kind of resonate with what I believe some of my clients would be. So decided to come up with a somewhat, you know, catchy name, and really the surprisingly the websites, the Twitter, the Instagram, all that was available. So it all kind of made a lot of sense, and I was lucky. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback for the name, but at the same time, sometimes people don't realize we are providing highly sophisticated legal work. So sometimes the name it's fun, it's playful, but at the same time, I think it's important to convey to the market that we're also a very serious law firm. We've litigated cases, we've handled very complex transactions, we've done licenses all throughout the country. So while it's a fun name, it's also important that they understand that it's a very serious law firm as well.
Well, that's evident to me, and that's why it works, in my opinion. I mean, from a marketing perspective, it's like you either get that kind of catchy, kind of playful, like you said, where it's not really legit and sophisticated, and like you said, but you're a well-oiled machine. I mean, you guys, you bring in your previous experience as an attorney into the cannabis space, like you said, because you saw that void back in 2017. And what were the two states that you said that you were focused on when you had been initially asked to help?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a Florida transaction, but it also involved Colorado. So there was, two different states involved. There was two companies coming together. So, it was relatively complex because you really had to understand the cannabis laws of both of those states.
So tell me, so like after that, you see that there's a void, and you tell me that's kind of where it all started with Mr. Cannabis Law. So how have things kind of progressed? How have you seen things change over the course from that time till now, as it relates to the legality surrounding cannabis, psilocybin, and I know that you're in the psychedelic psilocybin side as well of law, right? With what is it, Mr. Psychedelic Law. So talk a little bit about all that and how it's changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest change on the cannabis side was when the 2018 Farm Bill passed, which basically legalized hemp. And that's when, a lot of the smaller uh, companies and individuals were able to really enter the industry in a legit way. A lot of the marijuana companies, relatively high cost at this point. It's especially the Florida market is pretty much all MSOs, multi-state operators that have, 100 million to billion-dollar market cap. So really those companies are really not what our target is. Those companies generally will work with kind of the bigger law firms. We're really focused more on some of the smaller companies, which after the 2018 Farm Bill really opened up a lot of business because it allowed some of those smaller companies to get involved. And since then, you're just seeing a green wave of all these different states legalizing. Almost all this, nearly all the states have legalized some form of cannabis, and now a lot of them are working towards recreational or adult use as well. So there's been a huge evolution in the law, and I expect those laws to continue to keep changing in favor of further legalization. And really was in 2018, I had a lot of my cannabis clients were reaching out to get involved in the psychedelic space, many of which were like the doctors and the clinics that I represent here in Florida. It's only a medical market. So I work with a lot of different cannabis doctors and cannabis clinics, and they wanted to get involved on the psychedelic side. And at first I wasn't actually too excited. I wanted to stick to cannabis, but it was really after looking at the research and understanding that this is not based on any sort of anecdotal stuff. This was really backed by some really hard science and research. And that's when I kind of geeked out and started really getting super into the research and reading as much as I can. We helped launch several ketamine clinics, which ketamine is a Schedule III compound. It's FDA approved, so it's currently being used off label for various mental and behavioral health conditions. And we launched ketamine companies. We launched some different research programs with different universities. But really, what I recognized was that there needed to be legal reform. So I formed Mr. Psychedelic Law, which is a 501c4 nonprofit, and we're really focused on drafting legal reform across the country, but we're mainly focused here in Florida. We filed a bill last legislative session, and we're working on a new bill this next legislative session. But through my legal and advocacy work, I also started working with a lot of different startups in the psychedelic space, as well as investors, and helping investors due diligence on some of these psychedelic deals. And that naturally kind of evolved into me ultimately launching my venture capital fund in April of this year, really with the focus of investing in psychedelic biotech companies.
It's pretty amazing that, I mean, 2018 was the year, I mean, for you and the firm, it sounds like, because not only with the passing, as you mentioned, of the 2018 Farm Bill, which opened basically the gates for any and everyone who, you know, wants to grow hemp in this country, because it's now federally legal. Whereas before, like you said, it was kind of a little more competitive within the cannabis space, because a lot of the MSOs primarily make up that market, right? So, but then also the psychedelic side, like you had others that kind of like introduced you to that side of things. And given the mental health crisis that we're currently going through, seems like a really good place to be in, especially on the legal side, as you know, there's reform happening and so on.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, the mental and behavioral health crisis is probably the single largest problem society is facing right now. Over 1 billion people are suffering globally from some sort of mental health condition. And the unfortunate thing is the current pharmaceuticals just really aren't working, or at least aren't working the way they need to be working. And that's evidenced by the mental health, issues just continuing to increase and getting worse by worse. And really, it's no surprise that they're not working, because there's been little to no innovation for almost 3 decades when it comes to the CNS space, or the mental and behavioral health space. The same pharmaceutical compounds that people were taking for depression, PTSD, anxiety back in the 80s and 90s are essentially the same pharmaceutical products that are being used today. So there's this huge problem of the mental health crisis, and the current pharmaceuticals just aren't the solution. And meanwhile, you have this class of compounds called psychedelics that are demonstrating extreme efficacy, and not only efficacy, but they also have a really strong safety profile, as evidenced by some of the FDA phase 1 clinical trials that are going on.
Well, and given, you know, the huge problem as it relates to the mental health crisis we're currently living through, and you know, the, like how you mentioned, a lot of these traditional medications within the pharmaceutical industry aren't cutting it. Are you seeing, from the legal perspective, are you seeing like progress being made? I mean, are you seeing movement? I know that there's a lot of progress being made within the psychedelic side of things to treat mental health, not so much cannabis. Am I wrong? What are you seeing between the two?
Yeah, I mean, the main distinction I make between the cannabis and psychedelic space is that when all the dust settles with cannabis, yes, we've had medical markets, and yes, there's therapeutic value to cannabis, but when all the dust settles, I believe what we're going to be left with is about 90% of the market being recreational or adult use, right? What we're looking for in the cannabis market is really just full access for everyone. Right. I mean, and to me, it's not either medical or recreational. To me, there's a spectrum, right? Some people use it for some very serious indications. Other people are strictly want to have fun with it. But in the middle, there's some people that use it for pain or relaxation, to calm their nerves, whatever it might be. So it's really a spectrum, but really cannabis to me is driven by this recreational use. In contrast, psychedelics right now, the way it's unfolding, is really mainly driven by its pharmaceutical and biotech background to basically treat various mental and behavioral health conditions. So I believe when all the dust settles in the psychedelic space, there certainly will be a recreational, or you call it entheogenic or spiritual market. But I think the vast majority of the market, and where we're going to see the biggest breakthroughs and transformations is really on the pharmaceutical side of things. And that's why my nonprofit, we're focused on city and state legalization. I do believe in full access for psychedelic compounds. These compounds are way safer than a lot of these other pharmaceutical compounds, and they have the ability to really expand consciousness and heal our planet. With that being said, I think we need to prioritize those that are suffering the most, and those are people with very serious indications. And the proper federal pathways of doing that is to go through FDA clinical trials or Health Canada clinical trials, whatever jurisdiction you're in, going through those proper regulatory bodies to get essentially approved medications for these people with these very serious indications.
Yeah, I agree with what you say about, the difference between the cannabis side versus, it's how it's kind of really being pushed by the adult use, the recreation side, whereas psychedelics really being driven by the pharmaceutical side. And I mean, tell me if you agree, but it's really because of the night and day like effects and benefits that I think we're seeing as we're using these in different types of mental illness treatments, right? I mean, compared to the traditional stuff that you're saying, I mean, these patients are reacting responding very positively to some of these treatments.
Yeah, I mean, and don't get me wrong, cannabis, does there is a pharmaceutical market for cannabis. You have
Sure.
Epidiolex, Sativex, Marinol, there are benefits, and I'm starting through my investment.
The stigma may have slowed it down a little bit. The 100 years of prohibition, there's a lot of probably learning to do, a lot of education, I would imagine, around cannabis. Whereas
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know. What do you think?
there's learning and education to go for cannabis and psychedelics, but there is some medical value. And I'm actually, through my investment fund, seeing more and more decks for really biotech plays with cannabis. But cannabis, in my opinion, my non-medical opinion, it just doesn't have quite the same impact, the profound impact. It does help some people for some very specific different indications, whether it be seizures or even pain management, but not like what we're seeing on the psychedelic space. MDMA is in phase 3 clinical trials. The FDA has designated it as a breakthrough therapy. Psilocybin's in phase 2 clinical trials, was also designated by the FDA as a breakthrough therapy. And right now, in the phase 3 clinical trials for MDMA for PTSD, over in the last research that they published, it was showing that over 2/3 of people with PTSD were showing no signs of PTSD 1 year after going through the MDMA psychedelic assisted psychotherapy protocol. So 2/3 numbers in the pharmaceutical industry is absolutely amazing. You don't see that with Prozac, Zoloft. These other SSRIs and benzos are not having those types of numbers. So it's really profound to get over 2/3 of people showing no signs of that particular indication 1 year later.
Yeah, that is the right word to use. Profound. Absolutely. So tell me what, as as an attorney in both of these highly regulated spaces, what keeps you up at night? What are some of the main challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis?
Well, right now, to be frank, a lot of my time is spent on my investment firm. So we're doing a lot of diligence on a lot of different companies. And a lot of that diligence deals with, patents and clinical trial strategy, the teams. We generally invest seed or Series A rounds. So these are early stage companies. So really nothing keeps me up at night. But I think what's taking the most time is just, really trying to dig deep into the different companies and really figure out where the true opportunities lies within the psychedelic market. And it's my opinion that really the reason I launched the venture capital fund, obviously I do think there's a tremendous financial opportunity, but I also think that the impact that this capital will have is unlike any other industry that I could have deployed capital in. So we're really heavily invested in the research behind psychedelic medicines, because it's my belief that if we bring the capital into the research and we do the research and we bring it through the FDA clinical trial process, we will prove out the efficacy of these compounds, and we'll be able to really bend that mental health curve so that not as many people are suffering.
Speaking of research, you talked about, the research findings related to the MDMA studies. What are some other research findings that you'd like to call out?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this started with Johns Hopkins. Well, first off, it started really in the 40s and the 50s. We had tremendous research around various psychedelics for various indications, specifically LSD for alcohol use disorder was tremendous. And then in the 60s, some of the hippie counterculture started using these compounds for mind expansion as opposed for medical use, and the government didn't like it, so they created the Controlled Substances Act and listed them as Schedule 1 compounds, and basically stated they have no medicinal value and a high likelihood for abuse. If you look at the research right now, both of those elements do not exist with these psychedelic compounds. They actually have fantastic safety profiles. They have a very low likelihood for abuse, and they most certainly do have medicinal value. So the whole concept of Schedule 1 CSA for psychedelics makes absolutely no sense and is being completely disproven by the research we're having today. So once they were listed Schedule 1 in the 70s, really there was the research kind of died on its face for a couple decades. And then in the late 90s, and really over the past 5 to 10 years, has really picked up significantly. And Johns Hopkins, Imperial College of London, NYU now has a psychedelic center, UCSF. You're really starting to see all of these really top-notch educational institutions starting their own psychedelic centers, and the research that's coming out of there is absolutely tremendous.
That is fascinating that these universities are really starting to, put resources and attention into this burgeoning industry, because again, like you said, the results are so profound. You talk about your investment firm that you're really focused on now. What's the name of it so that we know?
Yeah, it's Eater Investments, ITER.
Eater Investments. And so you said that what you're looking for is early stage companies, startups. Primarily, is it in biotech? Is it in is it ancillary? Is it all of the above? Like, what are you focused on within the early stage?
We're mainly focused in biotech, but we're focused on the entire value chain of biotech. So not just the drug development companies, but also the companies producing the active pharmaceutical ingredients for those drug development companies. A lot of the producers are coming out of Canada because of some of the changes in the laws relating to psychedelics. And then also the clinics that will be delivering these compounds. And then of course the technology and supporting infrastructure that will support this ecosystem. So what's important is that third category of the clinics. Right now, the drugs that are being approved right now, MDMA and psilocybin, are both being approved under what's called REMS, risk evaluation mitigation strategies, that essentially requires that they're delivered and administered at a certified facility by a certified therapist. So this is a complete paradigm shift to what we normally see in psychiatry. Usually you go in to see a psychiatrist, they write you a prescription for some SSRI, you pick it up at the pharmacy, you take it at home, you come back to see your psychiatrist a couple months later. Under this new paradigm with psychedelics, it's this new infrastructure that quite frankly doesn't really exist, where people will need to actually go into a facility and have it administered at that facility. And the clinics that we have today, quite frankly, just probably aren't going to cut it for psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So we're starting to see a lot of different variations of what those clinics might look like in the future.
Well, and I would imagine during a time of COVID and the rise of Delta, like that wouldn't really be feasible when, we kind of don't want to be out or visit, I don't know. What do you think? Is that been challenging, or would that pose a challenge?
Absolutely. I mean, it's, look, so MDMA, I think, will probably be approved by the end of 2023. I think psilocybin will be approved by the end of 2024. So hopefully by that time we're out of this
Yeah.
COVID world, and sitting in a clinic with two therapists with a blindfold on and going through your issues with them hopefully won't be too big of an issue. But right now what we have today is ketamine psychedelic assisted therapy that is occurring right now today. And one of the companies I actually represent is a company called KetaMD. And what they're seeking to do is address exactly the issue that you're describing by using telemedicine for psychedelic assisted therapy that you could do at home. So essentially you'd be able to actually do at home psychedelic assisted therapy under the guidance of a trained nurse that's watching you through a computer screen.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think that could work. That's a good alternative, especially now that everybody's going more digital. I mean, we saw those percentage and those stats during the height of the pandemic. So now, Dustin, let's talk about some of the emerging technologies that you're seeing within, the psychedelic space.
Yeah, absolutely. The digital therapeutics are really starting to kind of take off, and these have a few different forms. Some of them are like wearables that are able to a lot of people are familiar with like the Aura ring or whatever it might be, or the bracelet that kind of
it's like a ring you put on your smartphone, kind of tracks your heart rate, your sleep pattern, like all that type of data, right? Doesn't it collect all of that?
So exactly. So there's kind of this emergence of wearables to be used in conjunction with psychedelic assisted therapy to kind of track some of that health data during the psychedelic assisted therapy session. But there's also various apps that are coming out. An important part of the psychedelic experience is not just the administration of the compound, but it's the preparation before and the integration after. And there's a lot of different apps and technology tools that are helping people better prepare for psychedelic assisted therapy, and then also integrate what they learned during the experience into their everyday life. And then what we're seeing a whole lot of right now is virtual reality applications, whether it be on the Quest goggles or some other hardware. And what's interesting about VR is that it's showing a lot of the mechanism of action that you see with psychedelics, that neuroplasticity and that neurogenesis. The virtual reality is starting to show some of the same mechanisms of action. So kind of when you go through, for example, we invested in a company called Trip, and they're a VR platform on the Oculus goggles. And if you kind of track what's happening in the brain during some of these virtual reality sessions, it's actually quite similar to what you see happening in the brain when people are taking different psychedelic compounds.
So in that example, the VR Oculus example with Trip, is it mimicking a psychedelic experience that one would have, and then tracing kind of the neural patterns and all the activity that's happening within the brain? Or are you saying just if you're playing VR in general, it kind of has the same effects that you would see someone having a psychedelic experience?
Yeah, this isn't like playing. It's not so much of a game. It's more of, very specifically designed application that's, built with the help of different neuroscientists that kind of have studied what images and what sounds have what impacts on the brain. And, a lot of people hear the VR thing and they think, oh, this is VR to be done like while you're under the influence of psychedelics. But a lot of the VR, what they're doing is they're actually using it more as a preparation session to kind of build some neuroplasticity prior to the psychedelic experience.
Gotcha. I bet, I can imagine be very, very valuable to someone who has never had a psychedelic experience before, right? Because we know that there's profound effects and benefits by doing it, but there could be, I would imagine, a lot of resistance and hesitation from individuals who never have experienced it and may be afraid or reserved to do so.
Yeah. I mean, everyone's kind of on their own journey and place with psychedelics. So certainly a lot of people with treatment resistant depression or major depressive disorder, whatever indication it might be, they may have never taken any psychedelic compounds. And that's really where the preparation comes in, whether it's through VR or some technology or just talking with the therapist. The goal right there is not only to, set the right intention for the session, but it's also to prepare that particular patient for what they're going to be experiencing during the actual experience that they're taking psychedelics in.
Wow. Well, along the lines of technology, and speaking of innovation, what are some kind of things or trends that you're seeing as it relates to the future of like clinics? We touched on clinics earlier.
Yeah, I mean, in the, for my investment firm, our thesis is really around psychedelics just being a tool. It's not the answer. It's the therapy, the setting, everything that goes along with it, as well as the lifestyle changes thereafter, are all important pieces of that. So, what's interesting about psychedelics is they involve so many different disciplines. It's not just a psychiatrist. There's oftentimes there's pain involved, so you may need a pain doctor. There's different things happening within the brain. So really, I'm imagining more of a multidisciplinary clinic with, really, that would be called more of a psychedelic center that you would be able to go to, and there would be various different compounds you could take for various different indications under various different settings, whether, a room for visual therapy, another room for sound therapy, another room for talk therapy. It's really highly dependent on the individual, the indication, and that particular individual's genetics. So I think as we learn more about psychedelics, I think psychedelics will really just be our window to the brain. And while the excitement is around psychedelics right now, I think what it's really going to do is just give humanity a much better understanding of the brain's capabilities and how it functions.
It's fascinating, man. It's echoed. It's been echoed on this podcast several times, and that is like just basically personalized experience within healthcare and medicine, right? And understanding your own genotype, your own, chemical genetic makeup, and what best interacts with your body, right? And dialing it in, which it's fascinating. And that makes so much sense with these clinics where you'd have a room specific for whatever it is you're trying to address. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm a big proponent of personalized medicine. I think the one size fit all approach just doesn't work. So a lot of what we do, we say at my investment firm that we're reimagining and reinventing the delivery of mental and behavioral health care. So it really is a matter of reimagining. You got to kind of take yourself out of, the current social constructs of what you understand the world to currently be, and step outside of that and try to figure out how the world can be and should be moving forward into the future.
Yep. And there's more people that are having that same viewpoint, man, because it's what we've been doing now, and like you said, for the past 3 decades, just isn't working. And I apologize, my dogs are barking, but this is a good time to wrap up.
All good. The dogs are excited.
They are. So, but hey, Dustin, I want to thank you so much again for your time today. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was super interesting and informative, and I know that the audience got a lot out of it as well. So, as things progress, man, let's have you back on and let's talk about it, because you're very knowledgeable.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And anytime you want me back on, I'm happy to be here and kind of catch up and see where things are at in the psychedelic and cannabis space.
Cool, man. We'll do it again. And thank you all for listening. Bye.